Hi everyone, my name is Harriet Steinbach. I am the Coordinator of Student and Community Outreach in the Dean of Students Office at Illinois State University. Among other things, I oversee parent and family services as well as off-campus services. Thank you for tuning in to our webcast for Off-Campus 101. We have designed this webcast with parents in mind. These are the exact slides that we share with students when we host the Off-Campus 101 information sessions for students in the residence halls. The message that I'll be giving you is very, very similar, although tweaked slightly because we know that parents are our audience as they're listening to this message today. Now, the first piece to be aware of before we move into the content of this presentation is understanding the university housing policy. The university requires students to live on campus their first 2 years out of high school. So generally you will hear students that are freshmen and sophomores live on campus and juniors and seniors will live off campus. But it's important to note that it's really based on their high school graduation date that's going to dictate if they are still required to live on campus or if they can live off campus. So we would be looking at, for folks who want to live off campus next fall, so for August 2015, we're looking at folks with a May 2013 high school graduation date that are eligible to live off campus. If your student is not certain, if you're not certain, then it is important to contact University Housing and get clarification on if your student can live off campus. We certainly don't want a situation where a student signs a lease to live off campus and then learns that they are not eligible to live off campus. That could be a very costly situation, paying for both an apartment off campus and a contract for university housing. Okay, I apologize for a little bit of a lag time there, getting used to this webcast. As we get into the presentation, my first message for you and your students is not to rush. There is a lot of pressure. Students get a lot of messages about the urgency of finding an apartment right away. Particularly, you may hear your students saying, October 1st, I have to sign a lease by October 1st. This is an artificial date created by the leasing companies. There is absolutely no reason your student has to sign a lease by October 1st. Certainly, if they are prepared to and they've thought through all of the details that we're going to talk about in this presentation, then they're free to, but we don't want to see students get in a hurry and make a hasty decision, because there are some legal and financial consequences to making a hasty decision on this matter, which we'll get into. If your student is thinking about something such as studying abroad next year, becoming an RA, doing an internship off of campus, perhaps considering transferring from Illinois State, then these are all examples of reasons your student should not sign a lease right away. It's important for students, if they have some sort of uncertainty about what's going to be happening next year, to not make a legal and financial commitment by signing a lease. There's absolutely plenty of time to find an apartment. I helped students in July find apartments that moved in August, so I can assure you that there are plenty of apartments in the area. Now, the main pieces in the apartment search for students are roommates, cost, and location, and these are the priorities that we hear from students. So I'm going to go into each of those topics. Roommates can be one of the most important topics for a student. I've put up on the screen some of the pieces for your student to be thinking about. Do you have a compatible lifestyle? How are schedules matching up? Is this an early morning person? Is this a person in a major that has early morning clinicals, student teaching, things like that? Or are you a student that prefers to stay up late? Certainly the level of cleanliness is a factor, and that can be a factor as students are living in the residence halls, but now we have a different kind of space, and we have a kitchen, and we have different cleanliness expectations, and so you want to make sure that those match up. Students want to talk about what are their expectations for sharing use of the common space, sharing food, dishes, those kinds of things. There can be concerns with overnight guests, boyfriends, girlfriends, friends, staying for the weekend. We will talk about paying rent in more detail, but one of the concerns, if it is a joint lease, is making sure that you have a roommate that's going to fulfill their obligation to pay their rent each month on time, or it becomes the responsibility of the other roommate. The other piece to be aware of is roommate conflicts, and students are often used to in the residence halls if issues arise. They have the RA to come to, they have the RHC, the full-time staff person, to come to speak with about concerns, assist them in resolving the conflict, and that's not the case in an apartment. And sometimes students do go speak with leasing managers, but the leasing manager is not going to play the same role that an RA has played. We sometimes tell students, this person, might be a good friend, might be a great person to go out and have fun with and have party with, but those lifestyles can sometimes seem incompatible when two people move in together. So it's important for students to consider what they want and what they need in a roommate. The next piece is budget. Certainly, budget is an important piece of leasing an off-campus apartment. We have a range of costs for apartments. I see rent as low as $350 per person per month, and as high as $950 per person per month. So that's quite a range of apartments and costs that are available. It's important, particularly for parents and family members, to have a conversation with their student about what they can afford. We cannot emphasize that enough. There are some absolutely fabulous and beautiful apartments in the area that your student may want to live in, but if it is beyond their budget, either the family budget that's available for housing or the financial aid that they're receiving, then it doesn't make sense to sign a lease for that apartment. So like I said, we do encourage students and parents to talk about what is an appropriate amount of rent for your student to be looking at as they're searching for an apartment. Your student may also want to talk with the financial aid office about what allocation they'll potentially be receiving, so that can help them have a sense of what will their budget be to assist in the apartment searching process. Students absolutely can use their financial aid to pay for their off-campus apartments. Now the other piece with budgeting is thinking about utilities and additional expenses that come from living off campus. While rent is the biggest piece and many apartments are all-inclusive, even those all-inclusive apartments sometimes have what we call a utility cap. That means that utility is included in the rent as long as it doesn't exceed the cap. So it could be a monthly cap of, for example, $100. There could be a cap for the length of the lease, for example, $1,200. So if your student was to exceed their utility cap, then they would be expected to pay that overages for that. Now, if a student is reasonable and responsible with their use of utilities, this should not be a problem. So as long as they are turning off all the lights when they're not there, not cranking the air, not cranking the heat during those seasons, then they should be all right. However, some apartments are not all-inclusive, which means that students will have to make arrangements for their own utilities, such as water, gas, power, internet, cable, if they want that. The other piece that students are most concerned about is location, and the biggest concern is always, can I be walking distance to campus? Many apartments are walking distance from campus. If I had to estimate, I estimate 75 to 80% of student rental properties are within a mile of campus. So very reasonable to walk or bike. Many students do bike and can use many bike racks on campus for them. There are several apartment complexes that are a little bit further from campus, and some students may choose those apartments for varying reasons. All ISU students can use the Bloomington Normal Connect Transit, that's the public transportation system, for free. All they have to do is show their student ID and these public transportation buses do pick up in all of the areas that are a little further from campus. Now, sometimes, as a rule, the closer you are to campus, the noisier it can be. That's not always the case, but it can be the practice if your student is looking for a particularly quiet space and they want to live in an apartment that's further from campus. Now, thinking about the apartment search, certainly this time of year, there is no shortage of advertisements from area leasing companies. So it's likely very easy for your students to get information about places to live on campus. But I do want to highlight a service that our office offers. It is the off-campus housing database, and you can see that web address on your screen. And this is an excellent resource for our students. It's a one-stop shop for apartments available in the area. All leasing companies have the opportunity to post their available properties in this database. Makes it very easy for students if they are looking to search for vacant listings, if they want to take a look at sublease listings, or if they're looking to see if anyone is in need of a roommate. The student will be prompted to log in with their ISU login and password for those search functions, but it's a very student-friendly, easy-to-use website, so I'd encourage your student to take a look at that site in their apartment searching process. As students are looking for apartments, which that initial step can really be done online, whether it's through our off-campus housing database or looking directly at leasing company websites, I encourage them to identify several apartments that they are interested in. So they have their criteria, primarily based on probably rent and location, but they may have other criteria such as being pet friendly or being an apartment that will permit both men and women to live together. Whatever those other criteria are, they will have that and they can do their search based on that, and from there identifying several apartments that they are interested in. We suggest maybe 3 to 5 apartments for students to go and look at. And we do encourage students to go directly to the apartment and take a look at it. They can call the leasing company and set up an appointment, and they should be able to show them that apartment. We discourage students from signing leases without having seen the actual apartment. Another piece in this search is really to consider safety of the apartment they're considering, or if they're considering several apartments, so they can always speak with current tenants and landlords to understand if there have been past crimes, noise, parties in that building, in that unit. The Town of Normal Police Department has a crime map, so you could access that online at the Town of Normal Police Department website. They have a crime map that's available. Illinois State student housing is mainly in Section 12. They map out the town by sections. So Illinois State housing is mainly in Section 12, and students and parents can go look at that map and do a search and see the crimes in that area. If folks need additional information, they can always call the police non-emergency number and get more specific information. In addition to those things, some other factors to consider with safety would be lighting. So a student may be making appointments and seeing the apartment during the daytime. We do encourage them to go back at night to see what's the street lighting look like. If they were going to be walking from campus regularly to this apartment, to walk or drive that path safely, maybe taking someone with them to see how is the lighting in that path from campus to the apartment they would be walking. Certainly students should be looking at door systems. Does the door have a lock? Does it have a peephole? Looking at the security of windows and screens. Apartments that are garden level or first floor can be at higher risk because of the accessibility to bust a screen, bust a window. The other piece to consider is the building secure? That's becoming increasingly important for students and has become very important for parents and family members. That is a trend in the last 5 to 8 years of construction. So there are apartments in the area that are 10 or 15 or 20 years old that do not have secure doors to enter into the building. So that is a factor for your student to consider, and a conversation for you and your student to have. But that might be important for you as a parent, but something your student is not thinking about. The other piece to be aware of is that all apartments are required to have fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, and CO detectors. Once your student has visited the apartments and made their decision, they know that they can afford the apartments, they know who all of their roommates are going to be. That next step is really moving forward to securing securing the apartment. So that requires the student to make a security deposit. We do see a range of security deposits. There's approximately 12 leasing companies in the area. So we see security deposits as low as $50 and as high as $800 down. That security deposit is there as protection for if the student does not pay rent, if there is damage when the student moves out. Students may also be asked to complete an application and submit an application fee. If so, that application fee, which we usually see is around $30, is non-refundable, whereas the security deposit is refundable because it is based on the state of the apartment when the student moves out. The application fee is non-refundable, and that is a fee that is part of the paperwork processing required by the company. Now here's the big piece. And there's a lot of content here, and I do want to spend a lot of time talking about this because this is some of the most serious material. So when the student has finalized everything, that last step is going to be signing a lease. And I can't stress enough that signing a lease is a legally binding document. Once the student has signed the lease, they cannot get out of it. This is, it is a legal document, and so if the student the next day changes their mind about who they want to live with, or if their plans change the next year and they've decided to become an RA, or they've decided to change their status with the university, none of those things change the fact that a lease has been signed. And many leases have a clause in there that does indicate that this is a legally binding document regardless of the student's status with the university. An individual lease means that the student is only responsible for himself. So that means that if we have a 3-bedroom apartment and rent is $600 per person per month, each student individually is responsible for paying their $600. But if one of the roommates does not pay their rent for that month, the leasing company is going to work only with that student. Each student is only responsible for themselves to the landlord. Now that is compared to a joint lease, which means that all roommates are jointly responsible for the rent each month. So in the same scenario, we have 3 roommates, and the rent is $600 per person per month, but one person does not pay. Of course the leasing company is going to contact that person and say, you need to pay your rent. But legally, they also have the right to approach those other roommates and let them know that the rent for your apartment is not paid. So if that person is refusing to pay rent, is having financial difficulties, has left the university with no indication of where they are, and the roommates have no idea what's going on with them, it is still a joint lease, and that means that everyone is jointly responsible for that rent, which means those 2 roommates are now responsible for coming up with $600 to cover that month's rent. Our office does recommend individual leases. We see a lot of different scenarios with students and situations that a student can never imagine that they are going to be a part of. An individual lease is the safest. It protects the student. So regardless of what's going on with the roommate, if the student is paying their rent and paying it on time, then they are fine. Now, a number of companies do require co-signers, so your student may be coming to you with some paperwork. Not every company, but many companies do require a co-signer. This is the situation where if your student stops paying rent, the company has your information on file that they can come to you and ask you to pay for that month's or the back due rent. It's important to note that some companies have a process where if all students get a co-signer, then it will convert a joint lease into an individual lease. So this is something that you may want to ask about. And then it's important that if that is the case, for the students to be vigilant in making sure that all students have their co-signer paperwork turned in. Inevitably, I have seen scenarios where everyone has turned in their paperwork. They believe everyone has turned in their paperwork, and then some roommate stops paying rent, leaves Illinois State. Everyone thinks they're fine until the leasing company comes to them and says, you guys need to owe the rent. They say, we thought that there was we all turned in our forms. That was the one student who had not turned in their form. So in fact, it is still a joint lease and not everyone is jointly responsible. There's a couple other pieces here on this screen. One is a sublease. If a student cannot live in an apartment for any reason, they will need to look for a subleaser. That is to find someone to take their spot, to assume their lease and the leasing responsibilities. The off-campus housing database that we mentioned on the earlier screen does have a spot for students to post if they need to find someone to be a subleaser. The other piece to be aware of is that we do have a student's attorney on staff, and at the end of this presentation I am going to flash the contact information for my office as well as the student's attorney. Our student's attorney for free will review leases with students. I highly encourage students to take advantage of this service for 30 to 40 minutes and no cost. This attorney will review with the students everything that it says in the lease. That way they have a full understanding of what it means, and he will discuss with them if there are any red flags on the lease. The last piece here is encouraging students to sign their lease at the same time. Again, I've seen lots of scenarios where students have made a plan and 2 people are going to go sign this afternoon and 2 are going to go the next morning because they have class, and who knows what's happened overnight, but now those 2 people don't want to live together anymore, don't want to live in that apartment. Their plans have changed. So now we've got 2 people on a lease for a 4-bedroom apartment, and they're scrambling to find other roommates. They're going to be jointly responsible for the cost of all of that rent, even though there's only 2 of them. So for renter's insurance, this is something we encourage students and parents to investigate. It's not required by leasing companies, but can be a valuable tool to have. It can protect damage if something, if there's fire, frozen plumbing, any kind of severe weather, if there was theft. For most folks, it is best to start with, for parents and families, to start with your home insurance provider and see if there is a rider for renter's insurance that they could add to their home insurance policy. Otherwise, there's a number of companies with fairly low cost of approximately $5 to $25 per month to purchase renter's insurance for your student. So this is where we see a transition in this presentation. I just talked to you about all of the processes and components of searching for an apartment and signing the lease. As we move forward now, we're talking about moving in an apartment, living out off campus, and community relations and those kinds of things. So much more futuristic, much more thinking about these are things that our students should be concerned about in the summer, in August, as they move in. But nonetheless, I want to get this information to you all because I believe it's valuable. The main piece when the student is moving in is that they need to do a walkthrough with the landlord or leasing agent, someone from the leasing company. They will likely have a form from the company to document the condition of the entire apartment. So we encourage students to use that form and walk through with the leasing company to document if there is any damage. In addition, students should be taking date stamped pictures or video of the apartment as they move in. Now this all for students seems excessive, and this is something that they don't really want to do and may not necessarily find the value in it, but in 10 months or 12 months when they move out, this can be very important to them. This is really about protecting yourself from excessive charges. So you want to document the condition of the apartment. That way if there's damage as you move in, one, that you make this request to have it repaired, but also so that when you move out, if there was never a repair, that you are not being charged for the damage someone else caused. Certainly throughout the year, there can be concerns that come up with apartments. There can be, a leaky dishwasher or the refrigerator stops working, those kinds of things. Your students are encouraged to report all problems to their apartment management. They may have a maintenance line, or they may just have a direct office line, but students should report those right away. We do encourage them to keep a log. Some companies have an online reporting service for their maintenance concerns, which would log that automatically, but if it's a phone call or a voicemail, or even if it's an email, we encourage students to save that email or keep a log of phone calls or voicemails that they're leaving in case there are persistent issues or that their phone is unresponsive, and they have that documentation. If there are these persistent or unresponsive issues, then the Town of Normal Inspections Department or the Dean of Students Office can be a resource to help the student resolve those concerns. We have Town of Normal Inspections phone number up on the screen now. We'll have the Dean of Students Office information at the end of this presentation, but those are two offices that can be a resource to assist students depending on what's happening in their apartment. The main piece here is as the student is living in the apartment, to keep the apartment in good condition so when they move out, they are getting as much of a security deposit back as possible. Now I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide with parents, but when we talk with students, we do spend a lot of time talking about community relations, letting students know that just because they've moved off campus does not mean that there are no rules. There's still expectations as an Illinois State student. And there are expectations because they are now living in the Town of Normal. They are a citizen of Normal, and depending on where they're living, they may be living in a residential area or in a neighborhood that is near to a residential area, and so they must be cognizant of what it means to be a good citizen, particularly being cognizant of noise levels for folks that may be on a non-student schedule, particularly on the weekends. We encourage students to not throw garbage in the yards if they're renting a house, to keep their space neat and tidy, to keep their upholstered furniture indoors. And if they're going to host parties, we do have campus and community resources that can assist them with that. We're certainly not telling students not to host parties, but there's a way to do that that is both safe and respectful and won't disrupt the community. Up on the screen now is a few of the key city ordinances that often impact students. This first one here can be of most interest to parent and family members. If you're thinking about purchasing a home, because you know that you'll have several students coming to Illinois State, and you find this to maybe be a more cost-effective effort than renting several apartments. Many of the areas that students live in are zoned as multi-family. So if you're looking at renting a house that's in a different area, it could be zoned as a single-family residence district. What that means is no more than two unrelated persons can occupy that unit. That's something to be aware of if you're thinking about purchasing a home for your students. And they will also be having unrelated friends, roommates staying in the property. We do have a KEG registration process in Normal that requires a student, of course, to be 21 to register the KEG at the liquor store as they're purchasing that. And then that purchaser and that paperwork is to always be with the KEG. We also have unlawful sale of alcohol ordinance. That would mean if students were charging $5 to get into a party or to buy a cup, those kinds of things. Those are very expensive ordinances if they're violated. There are ordinances related to fighting, underage drinking, and possession by a minor. We also have the amplified sound ordinance, which, as you can see, there is a $100 ordinance violation, and that can be an issue off campus if students are hosting parties, have a DJ, playing music very loudly. The town does have an upholstered furniture ordinance, which just require all upholstered furniture to stay indoors. And then students should also be aware of parking in their areas, particularly street parking and parking bans during snowy seasons, as that can be a challenge and students can find themselves getting parking tickets or getting towed. So finally, as we're looking at moving out of the apartment, we encourage students to clean, clean, clean. I can't stress that enough. You really want to leave your apartment in the best condition that it was in. Again, we're pulling out that inventory, that checklist that we had when we walked in and we moved in and walked through with our leasing agent. We're going to look at that same sheet again. We're going to document the condition of the apartment. It's really important for students to do this. Many times students are very busy finishing up finals, moving on to their summer plans. They could be doing a study abroad or an internship. They could be graduating, so they're in a big hurry to get packed up and moved out. And the leasing company may ask them to sign something, and then without looking at it, they just go ahead and sign it, and that can be problematic if the leasing company had documented damages to the apartment that the student disagreed with. Again, we tell students to take that date stamped picture or video of the apartment. This is, again, to protect the students. If a student does not get their full security deposit back, if there are additional charges because of damages, those documents, if the student disagrees with those charges, can help them to demonstrate to the leasing company that they did not cause that damage or that was not the quality that they left the apartment in. Certainly, if students don't get their full deposit back, they are legally obligated to receive an itemized list of all of the charges related to that. If they believe there were unwarranted or incorrect charges, they absolutely can question those and speak with the leasing company about those. And if they continue to have concerns, the student's attorney is always available for those students to help them resolve those matters. Folks, this is the last slide that I have for you. This is all of our department contact information. Again, my name is Harriet Steinbach, and I oversee off-campus services. You can see an email address there to reach me, as well as our off-campus services social media information. Our attorney, our student's attorney's name is Ed McKibben. You can see his email up there. We share a administrative assistant, so that is the phone number that you can call to reach both myself and Ed. And we're located on the first floor of the Bone Student Center. If your student would like to talk with either of us, they can always walk in. If they'd like a lease review, then they can call and make an appointment with our student's attorney. We have more information about off-campus services and the student's attorney at the Dean of Students Office website. And then again, I've put up there our offcampushousing.illinoisState.edu is the database for students to search for apartments. I want to thank you very much for listening to this webcast. I hope that you found this beneficial, and please don't hesitate to call us if you need any additional information. Thank you.